while this document is certainly not perfect in my mind, it is the result of a lot of work on a lot of different people's behalves. And really is a process that was started many years ago when we started running into lease ground issues. And myself, as well as others in our industry, were constantly complaining that there was no new ground available and that it felt like 90% of the bottom in the state was leased up, but less than 10% of it was actually being used. And at that point, we had to find a way to free up some of that ground. Because I think we all can agree that what we want is for leased state-owned bottoms to be used. And whether it's shellfish aquaculture is the primary use of them, but even if it's other forms that we need leased ground in the state of Virginia to be used and not taken up by people who are not culturing shellfish. It's too much of a benefit to the state, too much of a benefit to industry, and really is the state's goal to encourage aquaculture and other forms of shellfish culture on the state-owned bottom. So certainly I had my problems with this document when it was first produced. We've come back and I've seen a couple changes that make it much more friendlier in my mind, and that's what we'll be going over today. And so I encourage everyone to point out any last things you see with it that we can make it better, but believe we're at the point here where we should all kind of come behind this document.
Great, thank you, Chad. Secretary Strickler, do you want to provide any comments?
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Bolin and Associate Commissioner Ballard for your remarks. I won't say a whole lot here. You all have set this up really nicely. Other than just, I want to thank Chad, you and Mr. George, Mr. Leggett, Mr. Ford for your for agreeing to help serve on this ad hoc panel. It's an important issue that we take very seriously and want to get right, and definitely want to hear what the folks from AMAC and SMAC and the public have to say today. Just know that this is something that Governor Northam has been very closely involved in, has wanted to do to the benefit of the shellfish industry, and is something we haven't entered into lightly, and are, of course, as the Deputy Commissioner noted, are required to do by law. So we need to make some progress here, and I think as Associate Commissioner Ballard mentioned, we're moving in the right direction as far as getting to a place where folks can hopefully be comfortable with the language. So that's all I'll say, and look forward to hearing the discussion.
Great, thank you. So we have two primary documents and primary concepts we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about suggested changes to the lease renewal guidelines. So I'm going to try and share my screen. And then we are going to talk about possible changes to the rent statements. And that comes from feedback we heard from industry and staff to possibly address some of the record keeping burden. A couple of more quick notes on the top. The purpose of today is just discussion. We are just going to try to better understand what are some of the lingering concerns around these documents. There will be no votes taken by either the ad hoc committee or any of the participants and panelists. So I wanted to go ahead and set that expectation, and now we can move forward with the document. If you give me 1 second, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, excellent. So Associate Commissioner Ballard or Secretary Strickler, do you want to talk? I'm going to scroll down to the changes that we are suggesting. So everything that is in this document, other than what we're going to talk about, is the same content of this document that has been here for the better part of 6 months. So there are no significant changes other than what we are going to talk about which now I'm trying to find where those changes are. Give me 1 second, apologies. Oh, here we go. Sorry, it was not. So what we have right here is we have added this criteria on line 144 and 145. Whether the leaseholder or its related entities or persons is able to meet the significant protection criteria on average across the entirety of its leases as the law allows. So that is the primary change with this document. For the panelists on the ad hoc committee, would you all like to speak to your thoughts and concerns?
Alan, this is Matt. I apologize. If I can just chime in here. This is an older version of the document, and I'll let Chad talk about this too. But the way that this should read is in the preambulatory language on 140 and 141. Okay, now it's not up, so I can't follow it. But anyway, the preambulatory language is supposed to include to the extent allowable by law language, so that it's not a clause that's applying just to the additional criteria on aggregation across leases, that it's something that would apply equally across all of those criteria. And that was something that was very important, I think, when we were talking with some folks in the industry about this. So Chad, I don't know if you want to chime in on that as well, but that's certainly our intent.
Sure, and I agree with the comments there. In fact, received some calls this morning that, yeah, we'd like to see that as the law allows phrase removed from that section, and in the preamble on lines 140, 141, adding some sort of language is to the extent allowable by law. And I can just kind of provide some clarification on where this phrase is coming from and some history for those that haven't been involved in this process the whole way. But, you know, I think this phrase, lines 144, 145, is what we in the industry have referred to as an aggregate production metric. Which is really something we've been fighting for and mentioning at every step of the way in this process. And basically our thoughts were that if someone is clearly in the business of culturing shellfish, they're not going to be holding leases just to hold them. But for one reason or another, we might have them for a period of, you know, at least 10 years that they might be dormant. And I think a lot of us in the industry saw that. And when we had diseases of MSX and dermo, and with the shifting of the barrier islands on the seaside, there have been many periods like that throughout the industry's history that we need protection from things like that. And one of the ways we thought of would be that, all right, if you're clearly in the business of culturing shellfish, you've produced so much that you can meet the production criteria across all the acres you have under lease, that you shouldn't have to go through this lengthy renewal process that would be just a paperwork nightmare. So this is an attempt to do that, and I think it does it at least satisfactorily in my mind. There are parts I'd prefer not to have, and I'd like to have it be more automatic, but I also understand where VMRC staff is coming from and Secretary Strickler's office, and you know, they are not 100% sure that legally they are on, well, that they are on sound legal footing to renew on that criteria alone. So I understand their need for some mitigating language there, but I think moving it up to lines 140 and 141 is appropriate and gives me and at least the folks I've talked to in the industry some more comfort.
All right, thank you. We are pulling that language up there was obviously a bunch of thoughts and opinions on this document and wanting to make sure we have the right one. So I think, so what we can tell you is that language will be in that section. We are working very quickly to get that up. Are there other panelists that have thoughts or want to share their thoughts on this guideline document?
Ellen, this is Jay Ford. I don't have anything earth-shattering to offer other than I'm happy that we're moving in a direction that industry feels more comfortable with, that is also meeting the commission's obligation to the public resource. I also would echo Chad's comments regarding the movement of what's allowable under the law. I generally think that's sort of a throwaway phrase a lot of times when you have a document, because obviously it wouldn't be included in this and if it wasn't allowable under the law, but I think moving that to the top makes a lot of sense. And so we're supportive.
Great, thank you. That language should be up very quickly. We want to just give people a minute. It looks like one of the call-in people were speaking, but you were on. Here we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
All right, this is Tommy Leggett.
Hey, Tommy.
I kind of feel like Chad does. I'm not happy with some of the aspects of the guidelines, but I think it's probably best to go ahead and move forward. And I don't think this committee, the AMAC committee, should stop here. I think we can make some improvements over time with some other meetings. And I'm not going to get into what those are. We've discussed them before, but I think we can make some improvements in the future. About it.
Great, thank you. So Ben Stagg's screen is up now. Just want to check that this is the language we are speaking of. So we have added "to the extent as allowed by law" to lines 140 and 141, and then we've added the additional language, whether the leaseholder or its related entities or persons is able to meet the significant production criteria on average across the entirety of its leases, and that is lines 144 and 145.
Yeah, this is Chad. That looks good to me. I guess I'm just kind of curious. I assume in the final document that won't be in bold and will match the formatting of the rest, or is there something we're trying to highlight or draw attention to?
It's in bold just to make it easier to pick out in the document for people to be able to see. So the bold is not, it's an excellent question. The bold does not convey any added emphasis. It's just for letting people see it. So it'll be in the usual formatting.
Okay.
Okay. I think the order in which I'm going to do this is I'm going to, again, see if there's any additional comments from the ad hoc members, and then open up to the participants or the participants from AMAC and SMAC. But I do want to give members of the ad hoc committee a chance to provide any additional clarity or clarification. All right, if you are a member of AMAC or SMAC and you would like to comment, please put your name in the chat to VMRC staff. We are going to give you all the chance to comment. The first person that I saw was Becky Kubin. So staff, can you please open her mic and allow her to comment?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So I had a question. All of the other items have a bullet, and this one, I can't tell if it's a continuation of the line above it, so that it's use of the lease for husbandry, et cetera, comma, whether they have been able to meet it, or if it's its own separate criteria?
It is its own, my understanding, and Associate Commissioner Ballard or Secretary Strickler will correct me, my understanding is it's its own criteria. So it'll be bullet use of the lease for husbandry, et cetera, bullet whether the leaseholder or its related entities or persons. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, Ellen, this is Matt. You're correct. And Becky, thank you for the question. We've obviously got a few things we need to clean up here.
Okay, so I see that it's one criteria among additional factors that can be considered. And I guess I would just reiterate what I've said previously of when these leases go unused for so long, and especially in areas like the Lynnhaven River, where there may be public projects that are needing the area, I would like there to be some special consideration when something has to go through one of those leases so that we don't have to go through that valuation if it hasn't been used in 10 years or maybe ever. So I do appreciate the need of the industry to have these extra areas. I think it's just more when it comes to a conflict between that sort of holding it in abeyance in case it's needed use, which is kind of a non-use. It's just like a speculative backstop against an actual public need to, say, dredge a channel or do something through there. So I know that's opening a different can of worms, but I would like the commission to have some other some conversations about what would happen in that case, and would the localities have to go through that whole process of getting those permissions when it's not actually being used.
So I have a response to that, but I also wanted to see if other members of the ad hoc panel had additional thoughts and comments on that. So that's a really good question. And this is an issue that, as you well know, AMAC went back and forth on many, many times, because one of the drivers for starting this back in 2018 was to address some of the different user conflicts and the fact that there are many users on the water. And this is one of the criteria that will be reviewed as the commission looks at this, because if Ben can scroll up, the other thing that the commission and staff is required to do is to look at, is it in the public trust doctrine to renew this lease? And the public trust doctrine includes a variety of criteria that, let's email now, that lay out different factors that the commission can consider. So again, this is one of the many factors the commission can look at. Other members of the ad hoc panel that want to add to that or provide any additional clarity?
Ellen, this is Matt. I think that was a good explanation. Becky, to your point, we understand that concern. I think the key theme of all of this is balance. We're trying to find a balance, and I think to Tommy Leggett's good point earlier, I think it is appropriate for AMAC to continue meeting and to continue working through some of these issues. So these guidelines, I think, are a significant improvement. They're a good starting point for where we need to be for the commission to put down a marker. But certainly, as we continue to learn and the industry continues to develop and we continue to talk through some of these issues, we fully expect the commission to be revisiting these in the future. And
it was stated at the commission meeting in January, and it is the intent of staff to hold to this, that these are guidelines. They were specifically moved forward as guidelines because they can be easier to change. We made the commitment at that commission meeting that, as the secretary said, we will continue to meet with AMAC and other interested parties. And if new ideas and suggestions arise, we will bring those back to the commission to incorporate into the guidelines. We view this as iterative and not, this is the start, not the end. And also we committed to presenting to the commission next January what implementation of the guidelines looked like. And sort of some of the issues that we ran into, sort of successes, where some challenges may occur. This again, to reiterate, is the beginning, the ongoing part of this conversation, I guess, and it is not intended to be the final word on this. I see that Tom Kellum would like to speak. Staff, can you open up his mic, please?
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Bowman. I had just one quick question going to the previous comment. Does this document interact with the eminent domain protections in the code on lease grounds, or has that been talked about?
That's a really good question, and actually it has not. That has not come up at the AMAC meetings. Jay Ford has also attended the AMAC meetings, and he can chime in, but that has not come up, and I'm hesitant to speak to that because I don't know. So if someone else on the ad hoc committee has suggestions or insight on that, that would be great. If not, I will make a note of it, and we can circle back with you on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anybody have any insight to that? This is the first come across.
Yeah, this is Chad. I guess I'd pose that question to Tommy, and you know, he's very experienced at the Shellfish Code, and does he think there are any issues, and what's the worry?
I have not previously, but based on Ms. Kuhlman's question, just wonder what the interactions on renewals and eminent domain would be if I had a lease that was or was not productive. Well, I guess in a case that was productive, and could renewal be denied on a case of eminent domain?
This is Matt Strickler. If I can just jump in here, nothing in these guidelines is intended to impact those kinds of thorny issues. I mean, you know, the eminent domain concerns are certainly you know, something that you know, that's an ongoing issue, but this isn't you know, designed, and nor do I think the effect would be to tip the scales one way or the other on that. I mean, we're you know, there are obviously a number of considerations in here. I don't think it's and maybe I'm just not understanding the question fully, but I don't think that that's you know, something that would be impacted by.
And to clarify, if we could bring the lease document back up, that the sequencing of the events is that, you know, we will look at a variety of factors, but if the lease is productive, you know, the code states that we need to renew it if the lease is productive and meets the productivity standards. But I can agree with Secretary, this is not intended to touch this. We can circle back offline to see if there's anything else. Staff, are there other members of AMAC or SMAC that have indicated they would like to speak?
No one else at this time.
Okay.
Tommy, Mr. Callum does have a follow-up question.
Okay, Mr. Callum, do you have a follow-up?
And this is more of a procedural question. If this were to be approved, just from a staff level, if a lease were to be denied based on one of the criteria, does that piece of bottom then go back as vacant what would be the process on a lease that were denied under one of these criteria?
Sure. I think, did I hear Ben chiming in quickly? No. It depends on, this is a conversation we also had. To some extent, it depends on sort of why the ground was denied. So if the ground was denied, which it can be denied for a variety of reasons, so say the person didn't meet, we'll take the most basic case, right? Someone actually just doesn't even submit their renewal forms, then it just goes back into the public pot. If it's denied because they didn't produce on it, you know, again, we will send it back into the sort of the common ground. If there are other public interest reasons, so for example, Becky Kubin said, you know, if it's denied because it's in the public interest to, or it's deemed by the commission that it's not productive and in the public interest to address some city needs, then my guess is what would probably happen is we would take some of that out of, off the map, or if someone applied for it again, we would tell the commission, you know, this was previously denied for renewal for X, Y, and Z reasons. We try to, then STAG tries to be very clear with people who apply on if this ground was previously applied for and the commission denied it and why.
And Ellen, can I weigh in just a second?
Yes, please.
Problem I'm having is I'm having a hard time unmuting when I'm sharing my screen at the same time. So I stopped sharing my screen for a second. There is a regulation about the 10-year renewal that spells out the criteria separate from these guidelines of what happens when it gets denied, and it can be appealed to the commission. So what would happen is if it was denied and the person appeal that back to the commission, we would hold the ground would stay intact during that time because we can't really terminate it if it's been appealed until the commission makes the final action, because we don't want someone to apply for it. So that's kind of how that would work. But if it's not appealed after the appeal period, which is 60 days, then yes, it would come off the map, it's vacant bottom, and that's it. The way I read the regulation, and I think that's the way we set it up. Did that answer the question? Maybe?
Yes, that was a very good explanation. I appreciate it.
Oh, I think I was actually muted on that one. There are people on the phone that would like to speak. AJ Erskine, I know his number starts 804-529. If you could open up his mic for his comment.
Hey, Ellen, this is AJ. Thank you. And I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this document. I'm not going to take a lot of time. You all know that I'm not overly satisfied with the document. But I did have one comment. I do want to keep in mind and make it for the public record that, you know, this industry has been through a lot, historically and certainly recently. In particular, I think we provide something very unique to the public. And in terms of the benefit, the public benefit is clean water to this Chesapeake Bay and the seaside. And that's very unique. We grow shellfish, and that's a free service, ecological service that's provided, trapping nutrients, filtering the water, providing water clarity for seagrasses. I think that's something we should keep in the back of our mind, that that's public benefit for all citizens of the Commonwealth. I do have a comment or question pertaining to specifically the guidelines. I appreciate the modification that was made. It does make me feel a little bit better that that's in there, and I appreciate the hard work that's gone into it. In light of the pandemic and where we are, and this industry has been through a lot recently, I wonder if we could have a delayed implementation so this industry can better understand, you know, the criteria and the guidelines that are being placed on these lease renewals. I don't necessarily have a date in mind, but if there was an opportunity for either the ad hoc panel or maybe the commission to entertain delayed implementation, I think that would be helpful for the industry. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, AJ. That's a good question. When we spoke at, and a good thing to clarify, when we had presented at the commission last month, we clarified that this would be implemented on a rolling basis, that we would consider, this is coming in, for some people, their renewals may be up, mere months after, assuming the commission adopts these. If the commission adopts these, their renewals may be up mere months after that. And we understand that these are new requirements and that there may be documentation that people may not have. So it has always been our intent to sort of provide a rolling implementation. Although I do think it's worth noting that some of the criteria in here, I do think actually, timely or not, would benefit people who may have had impact, may be impacted by the pandemic. There's specific language in here that says, sort of scrolling up, if you can, I don't have control of the screen, that specifically states if there are issues with product marketability, that is a reason that if you may not have been able to meet the productivity standards, but your lease can still be renewed. So I think it's worth sort of looking at both how this can also benefit people, because it does further clarify the criteria with which staff can use to renew a lease that may not have met the productivity standards. I think we probably have a couple of people on the phone. Okay, Beverly Ledford would like to speak. Can you please open her mic?
I just wanted to mention that the question that was raised about leases that would be denied going back into the opportunity pool for people to apply for, that there is quite a substantial or lengthy wait period for leases to be lease applications to be addressed. In other words, there are people that have been on the list waiting for their lease application to be addressed for, I think it's been as much as 7 years. So this is not something that happens, very quickly in my mind. I don't know. Can you address that, Ben? Thank you.
Ben, do you want to speak to that? So Ben is, because Ben is sharing his screen, there are some challenges in trying to get off mute. So that is what we are seeing right now.
Well, I just wanted to, I guess most people know, and I can look online and get back and report, but, there's quite a backlog right now.
Correct.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I have to switch back and forth. It is true we have a backlog. The ones that are 7 years old are because they're protested, and most of those it's because we're having issues on either the applicant doesn't want to move forward or other reasons. But we do have a 200 survey backlog. So if a piece of ground reverts, Beverly's correct. You won't be able to just swoop in and apply for it and get it right away. There is some time lag, but we are catching up on those, and that's really the best I can answer that question.
We also, and Ben, I believe we hired an additional person about 1.5 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, to address the backlog. We also received some fees in legislation in 2020. And those fees did grant MRC the ability to hire some additional staff to address this problem. So we recognize that this is an ongoing issue, and we are taking steps to increase staff to handle some of the workload.
The reason that I mentioned it was because several folks had contacted me and said, I've been trying to get a place to start my own aquaculture business, and I've not been able to because there's not anything available that's close enough for me to be able to do it. And I think that one of the things that has been brought up is that it would make, if the people were denied for just reasons, that it would make bottom available. And I think that people need to realize it might not make bottom available for the foreseeable near future. That was my comment.
Understand. Thank you. Are there others? we'll go to the computer first. Are there others who have indicated they would like to speak before we just open the phone line? Staff, can you open the phone lines to see if anybody would like to chime in that is not on the computer? If you are on the phone and you would like to speak up, now is the chance. Okay. I hear some noise, but I don't hear anybody speaking, so I'm going to assume that we have covered the issue. Staff, if you can please remute the phone lines.
Yeah, Deputy Commissioner Bowman.
Yeah.
This is Lake Coward. I'd like to, AJ and I are together, but I'd like to make one comment and follow up on what AJ said. And certainly in the implementation period, when, you know, in dealing with Ben Stagg and dealing with the staff at VMRC, which we've done for years, they've been very professional. But, you know, I certainly feel like they're overloaded at this point with lease renewals, with backlogs of applications, with applications, transfers of applications. We've been in the process now with Ben's help of transferring some leases over the last 2 months. And certainly I think the department is overloaded with the staffing that they have now. COVID-19's come along and even reduced staffing even more because the staff is only able to work several days a week in the office. So I think all of this needs to be taken into consideration by the commission when the commission meets next Tuesday. When you start talking about implementation, AJ addressed that issue a while ago. I just wanted to reiterate that there are internal situations at VMRC that may not make this development or the adoption of this criteria and the implementation of the criteria a reality in the near future.
Thank you for your comment. Sort of 2 points there that I wanted to clarify, which remind me of something I hadn't spoken to. This will not be in front of the commission next week. You would have needed to notice that the commission gave us 60 days to address this, so this will not be on the agenda on Tuesday. So first thing. Second thing, sort of for what staff has been doing, while there has been a very challenging time for everybody involved, one of the things actually that both Commissioner Bowman and I are quite proud of is the fact that staff has really rallied to address the ongoing issues, even in spite of COVID-19. And they have come in when they can, they have taken work home. And just because our staff is in the office does not mean that they have not been working on these issues. And so everybody has capacity to work from home. So I did want to clarify that just because people may not be in the office every day, that for the vast majority of functions, we are continuing to work as an agency throughout this pandemic. All right. Unless there's other questions from the participants, I'd like to close that and bring it back to the ad hoc committee. So we can mute those lines. So for members of the ad hoc committee, do you have any follow-up comments on questions on this particular thing? Again, we're not going for a vote here, just to provide any additional comments on this issue.
This is Chad. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time or not, but I had a few comments on the renewal form that was mailed around as well. I don't know if we're going to look at that or not.
We are indeed. We're headed there next. But I wanted to close out this and excellent question. So before we move on to that, though, are there any additional questions around or comments around the lease renewal guidelines themselves? Hearing none. I want to thank you all and the participants for sharing your insight and input on that, and we will continue to work with that as we refine these documents. Ben, can you put up actually, I think I have this, so I can help out here. If you all can give me presenter status back, I can share my screen because I have the rent statement up. Excellent. Hold on one moment, please. Is it? thing we wanted to talk about was possible changes to the oyster ground lease, rent, and activity statement, sort of more broadly shellfish ground lease, rent, and activity statement. So this is a conversation that's come up a couple of different times. Everybody that holds leases in the Commonwealth pays rent. They pay rent annually. And previously on the rent statement, we had questions of, did you do anything with your lease? Sort of, what did you do? And while we collected that information, when we switched databases, we weren't really inputting that related to the lease. Some of the feedback we got from different members of AMAC is, can we use that to provide information about how we use the lease? So in 10 years, we don't have to necessarily look back through every single piece of paper that we have. You all will have some of the information. We will have provided you that information as we go along. So it's a little bit easier for everybody. Sort of best thing would be like if you got 10 years of W-2s at the end, you both communicated every year about what that looked like, and then the agency had a record of that at the end. So this is the document we're talking about. And this is up for obviously discussion. You can clarify, sort of what did you do? Did you plant shell, mulch, oyster, or clams? Look at the amount you planted. And then this gets into all the other things that we include. Now, one of the other things I want to mention, because it came up multiple times, is there is still the option of a use plan available to leaseholders. So the use plan has been discussed a variety of times at the governor's working group, when legislation was being developed, multiple times at AMAC. So there's a couple different options for how leaseholders can communicate how they're using the ground to MRC. And a use plan is one of those. So if they have 10 leases and they use those for different things, if they submit a use plan that says, I use X, Y, and Z lease for nursery, broodstock, or wet storage, I grow on these leases, that also gives staff more information when we are going to renewals. And that is also one of the things that we will likely tackle next at AMAC with other interested participants is can MRC, while working with industry and stakeholders, provide better guidance on what that document would look like and how it could be helpful to people. So this goes through some of the variety of things that you can do and just lays out. And I think this gets a couple purposes. One is it gets the leaseholder thinking, okay, what did I do this year, right? It's always easier to remember what you did this year than 9 years ago. And then also offers MRCOA to help keep some of the records with that. Secretary Strickler, do you want to provide any additional insight to this, or Associate Commissioner Ballard?
Thanks, Ellen. I think I would just say, and Chad, please feel free to chime in here, is that this is, kind of the most elegant and simplest way that we could think of to get this information back from folks with the least possible paperwork burden on folks who are in the industry, and we're certainly sensitive to not wanting to put more reporting responsibility on folks in terms of another set of papers to deal with. But this is an existing form that folks are familiar with, and the way that it's set up here, I think, is fairly intuitive and hopefully user friendly. So that was the idea here, to keep it simple and allow us to help folks basically position themselves to have their leases renewed just by using an existing form.
Yeah, hey, it's Chad. I got a couple calls this morning of some really intelligent comments on this I thought were interesting, but one question that was raised was, since we have mandatory reporting, could we include that data on this form so that when you get your renewal in the mail, it says, and your mandatory reporting records show this harvest amount, and maybe even show you the average or the production criteria metric, so each year that your mandatory reporting is tracking and is showing on this lease. That way you don't get to the end of 10 years and have to figure out whether your records are being kept right. I don't know if that's something that would be easy to program into the report, but it certainly looks like it might be doable. And the second comment I thought was interesting as well was that while this form is very simple, in some ways you could read it as a way to get your lease renewed if you're not using it. That it's almost like a criteria of, all right, well, I didn't plant anything, so let me go down, and you could say, oh, erosion control, that's what I'm doing. And maybe being a little more vague and not leaving all these things listed on there might be a better way of accomplishing the goal of having people that really aren't using the leases not being able to renew them.
Okay. Ben, do you want to talk to, or Ben, can you speak to how Chad's question on integrating mandatory reporting and the rent statements?
I'll take a shot at it. If you can scroll down to the bottom of that form for a second, that you're sharing, right there. That's good. So there's a note at the very bottom right there that says all commercial shellfish harvests should be reported monthly as required by VMRC mandatory reporting. That's not on the rent statement now, but that was an addition in addition to these questions. I mean, we could ask here for you to repeat your mandatory reporting on this form, but that seems like a double effort that you shouldn't do. I think the other thinking was, could we adapt mandatory reporting to ask these questions? And when you do your monthly reporting, you answer some of these questions if you've done some of those, and it gets sucked right into mandatory reporting online. There is no paper. You just do it online. So that and IT person says that's possible to amend the mandatory reporting to add some more fields of other activity besides harvest. So it could be captured here on this form yearly, or could, in theory, be done through the mandatory reporting system itself as an alternate, and then you wouldn't have to answer these questions on paper. The issue for us, of course, is you do it this way, we're going to have to enter all this information into our database by hand, because maybe we could automate this too at some point in the future when we start sending rent statements out, maybe by email, and it can accept payments electronically. But anyway, the thinking was that something like this could be adopted into the mandatory reporting program, and then there would be no paper at all. It would just be online. And if you didn't report, if you didn't have any harvest or you didn't have any activity, you're supposed to report now, no activity, no harvest. So that's the best I can do to explain the possibility of hybrid mandatory reporting idea.
Ellen?
Yes, go ahead. I think that's Jay.
This is Tommy.
Tommy. Sorry, Tommy.
I was just checking to see if you could hear me. I want to back Ben up on that. I think that is a phenomenal idea, and I was not going to bring this up. I was just going to wait until we had a meeting about this. But this would be, with the computer technology that we have nowadays, this would be so simple to put in our monthly mandatory reporting. And every shellfish harvester and grower is now required to do this anyway. So as Ben said, if you're not reporting, you're not going to get captured. You're going to miss out on this. And like this afternoon, I had an oyster farm tour. That's part of ecotourism. It would be so simple for me to just add the number of oyster farm tours that I did during a given month. You could get as much detail out of that as you want, how many people, the lease number, and so on and so forth. So online reporting is the way to go to capture most of this data. And I think that would be a quick way to weed people out that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing and keeping leases that they shouldn't be keeping. And do away with this paper stuff, paper reporting that Ben mentioned that they have to key in and log in anyway.
Got it. So sort of on that note, some of the conversations we've had internally across a variety of issues is how to better improve electronic reporting what are some of the things that we can do electronically. And I think that sort of as we get through this, that is something that staff will likely revisit on, what are our options? How can we do this? One of the challenges that MRC has that's really become more evident this year is that there's actually still a remarkable number of our permit holders, I think it ends up being about 40 or 50%, that do not have email and do not have access to computers or choose not to. Choose not to is a strong term, but we don't interact with them electronically. So that's not a reason to not do it. I think those are some of the considerations we're having is how can we bring some of these processes online while still serving the needs of communities that may not have access to broadband, et cetera. But I think this is a good idea, something we can definitely explore.
Yep, I can appreciate that last point.
Yeah, this is Chad. I'm sorry, I probably wasn't very clear with my original question. And I understand the point Ben's talking about, but my question was from a information reporting from VMRC back to the leaseholder, when they receive this document, could it show what VMRC has on record for them for mandatory reporting? i.e. right at the top when it says lease number, plat file, acreage, rate, could we also have a harvested column or planted column or whatever the figures might say to be able to say, here's what we have in the system for you?
I'll try to handle it. I think the quick answer to that is yes. That should not be a very big problem to do because we already have the data. It's just a matter of coding it, and we have a pretty good IT guy. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but yeah, I think that can be done. The problem right now is when we pull that data up, it's a lot. It's a lot of data. But if you wanted to just know for that year, that previous year, what was my mandatory reporting? Yes, I think we could do that, and that wouldn't take up a whole lot of room on this form and wouldn't be confusing. So I think the answer is yes.
Okay. Are there other questions or comments about this form from the ad hoc committee?
Ellen, this is Matt. I would just offer that I think there are a lot of good suggestions here, and they all sound like things that we ought to be doing and can do to the extent that that folks are and have the capability to be receiving and transmitting information electronically. And Chad, to your point about how specific or how vague we are with what kind of questions are on this document, I do think it's probably worth just looking at this again with an eye towards that before it starts going out. So that's a good point as well.
Other members of the ad hoc committee that would like to say anything before we shift to participants?
This is Jay. I would just add, anything that encourages additional transition to electronic is a good thing. I think that's going to be a generational shift, but getting the infrastructure in place sooner than later is a good move for the commission as a whole. I also think the ability to update on a monthly and a rolling basis would provide better, more complete information than essentially a checkbox here. So I would certainly encourage that option as well.
Got it. Understand. All right. I'm going to shift out to the participants. Because I'm sharing my screen, it is harder to see for me to see the chat box. So if people would like to speak, people from SMAC or AMAC would like to speak, please put your name in the chat box. And staff, can you please, just as they come in, unmute them and let them speak, because I can't, it's harder for me to see it.
Yes, ma'am. Pat Gear would like to comment.
Go ahead, Pat.
Chad, I'm just going to comment on I think what you suggested about having the harvest data on there is a great idea. And I think it's something we can definitely do mandatory reporting. We'll start discussing it with IT and see how we can get it done.
Great, thank you. Are there, it looks like I can see some. Beverly Ledford would like to speak.
Yes, I think that when I saw this form, I was really concerned because we were trying, I think, to reduce the amount of paperwork that watermen had to keep rather than to increase it. So, I am concerned about that. I think that where it says provide documentation, specify education usage, all this, it means that you're going to be doing some sort of a report annually, which is more than we were originally proposing, which was every 10 years. So it isn't paperwork reduction, it's paperwork increase. So that would be my point, that if the leaseholder has the harvest that meets the criteria, then there should be no other additional activity reporting required. Is that true, Ben?
I'm not really sure how to answer that question.
In other
I
words,
understand the argument that it's more paperwork because this is a piece of paper, and this is what we mail out at the moment. So I think the argument we heard from industry was that keeping records for 10 years, was problematic in trying to pull all that stuff back up from 5+ years ago versus being able to report more timely. And this was a very rough draft attempt to come up with some other way to capture it.
Yeah, Ben, Ms. Ludford, I'm sorry if I can just maybe try to put a finer point on that for you. This is Matt Strickler. What we're trying to do here is basically put the record keeping burden on the commission versus on the leaseholder, and all the leaseholder would have to do is report versus keep the records, if that makes sense.
It does, but if, as I said before, if you meet the mandatory harvest criteria, then I'm assuming, which is not, I do that a lot, that you would not have to answer these other questions, even if you did them. If you have harvest and you have ecotourism and you have education and all that, if you meet the harvest criteria, you wouldn't have to write all of these other reports every year.
That is correct. That's the way well, at least that's what the guideline document says. If you meet the minimum effort for harvest, you're in. Even if you did some of these other things and don't tell us, you're in. You're approved. Yes.
So I'm going to go ahead and echo that, because I think this is a really important thing that ensure that everybody understands that the first criteria that staff looks at is the criteria laid out in the code, which is regarding, is it substantial production? And so if you meet that, then you are approved. And we do use mandatory reporting to check that. So this was primarily to get at, just like Tommy said, that if you do an eco tour that year, to provide more of a, as the secretary said, that we do more of the record keeping. But yes, mandatory reporting, if you meet the minimum harvest requirement, you are approved.
Well, I think that just in another comment to make sure I'm right, as it is now, we report harvest or no harvest, but we report no activity, and that's not necessarily true. In other words, we don't have a choice right now. We either report harvest or we report no activity. We don't have another way to say, but we did this. Am I right?
That is correct. The only thing right now that happens on the rent statement, there is a question at the bottom, the current rent statement. It's not this new one. It just says, did you use the lease, yes or no, and then a place to write remarks. Most people don't write anything in the remark. A lot of people do check yes, but that doesn't really give us anything. It just says yes. So this was an attempt to specify that in a more robust way.
That wasn't my question, Ben. I'm sorry to interrupt you. My question is, on the mandatory reporting, the electronic,
yes,
automated system,
Yes,
You either report harvest or you say no activity.
right.
And
That's
that is
correct.
not, that does not allow you to say no harvest, closed for 30 days because of a sewage spill.
I agree. And, you know, Pat can weigh in if he wants, but that's the way it's set up, I believe.
So the question is, you know, if you report no activity, then there should be a comment line. That's all I'm saying. It would be easy to add a comment line that you could put in there, you know, closed due to sewage spill, no market due to COVID, you know, something. Instead of no activity, it sounds like you just weren't doing anything because you weren't going to, you don't have any future plans to do anything, or you didn't have any plans to start with, but your plans got altered, not by you, but by Mother Nature or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's we can add variables to the data set. That's a little bit more complicated and it's limited. We can't have an endless number of variables, but we could look into adding a couple of variables where, you know, if you had circumstances that you had, if you're reporting no activity, but you had other activity, maybe one or two, you know, a common area where you can put some information in. You know, it would be, we can put that, you know, we can look into doing that, but we can't put an endless number of variables into the database.
Understood. I just think that, and I'll stop after this. I think that the reporting system as it currently exists is capturing harvest or nothing.
Okay, correct. So I think that this conversation helps us clarify. Sort of, there's two approaches to this. There's the question of if we want to collect this, if people feel like we should collect this information and collect it annually, so should we do it? And then I think the second set of questions are, how do we do it? And I think as we go through this, I think that what we're trying to glean is answers definitely to the first one is, do people feel like this will be helpful down the line? And then we can start to get into the weeds of what are the different options we can use to collect these data, be it rent statement, be it modifications to mandatory reporting. It looks like Russ Perkinson would like to speak. Staff, can you unmute his mic, please?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, good. First off, I think it's generally a good idea to include these questions on the rent form because you know, it's a long memory that reach back 10 years when it comes up for renewal. So I think it's a really good idea to get this information on this form. And generally, I can agree with most of the questions on there. They do have a water quality concern with one item, and that's the shell turning with Douglas Bridge. The Commonwealth's put a whole lot of effort into.
Hey, Russ?
Yes.
Yeah, you sound really muffled, so at times you'll come in and out. So I just didn't know if you could either move closer to the mic, speak a little louder, because we want to make sure we capture your point. That's better.
Yeah, let me try. I'm getting real close now. So I think Commonwealth's put a whole lot of effort into reducing sediment entering water bodies, especially the tributaries of the bay and the bay. And it's the industry has benefited from that effort to improve water quality. So I hate to see the encouragement of a practice that I think could, one, adversely impact SAV, there's SAV present. Secondly, resuspend sediment, especially fines. So I'd rather see this shell turning taken off the list because I don't think it's something people really ought to get credit for. I could live with it if it's, let's say it's in 2 meters or deeper water, 6 feet or deeper. There's not going to be any SAV there, first off. And I think the other situation, if it's sandy bottom in that deep water, I think there's probably minimal impact with resuspension versus more of a silt bottom would be a lot of resuspension. It just seems counterproductive. Try to keep sediment out of the tributary in the bay, and then we're going to promote a practice that stirs up what's already there. So that's my only comment. I'd rather see that taken out. if it is left in, it seems like there needs to be some specification greater than 6 feet of water, and not the one areas with silty bottom. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Tom Kellum would like to speak.
Yes, quickly, I'd just like to compliment staff. I think for a document that renews a 10-year, so to say, contract for the privilege of lease and bottom, I think staff has made this as direct and simple as it could be for something this complex. And I would say that I think you've done a good job in the construction of this document.
I think people know this is not the 10-year, this document is not for the 10-year lease renewal. This is for the annual rent payment. Correct?
Correct.
But I guess what I was stating was that the information captured to this going towards the renewal. I think it's very simple for the information that needs to be captured, and I really don't see how it could be any simpler.
Understand. Thank you. Are there others from that are on the computer from SMAC or AMAC that would like to speak to this document? All right, I'm going to, Tim Hupke, were you trying to chime in? No, okay. I'm going to ask staff to open it up to the phone lines. If there are people on the phone that would like to speak to this document, please, the staff, if you can unmute the phone, and we will see if anybody wants to speak to the document.
Ellen, this is Ann Gallivan.
Hi, Ann, go ahead.
If possible, is it possible to separate the guidance document from this document? Can we move forward on the guidance document and continue working on the rent statement document in AMAC or in the ad hoc committees? Because it seems like there's a lot of opinions and voices that need to be heard and maybe some different versions of this, but it sounds like the guidance might be able to move through. Or does it need to be both be done at once?
That is a good question, and I'm going to defer to the members of the ad hoc committee on that.
This is Chad. I got to speak in front of staff who probably has a better answer than I do, but I mean, in my mind, this is the renewal document is just a form. It probably doesn't even need commission approval. I mean, every time the commission sends an invoice or something, we don't approve what the format's going to be. So I would totally think they could be separated, and the renewal form can be a living, breathing, working document that could change every month if staff wanted to. But I guess I defer to Ben and others for that.
Chad, I would just echo that. This is Matt, and Ann, thank you for the question. You know, in my mind, the purpose of this, you know, the additional information being gathered on this form is to make, you know, what's being required in the guidelines easier to comply with. So, you know, I am fine with the guidelines moving ahead, and for us to continue to work together to refine what would be included in, you know, in this document, with understanding that, you know, you're still going to have to, you know, to follow the guidelines even in the interim, if that makes sense.
And does that address your question? Can you hear me? I can hear you now.
Yes, I just feel like there, that my personal opinion is that I feel like the rent statement, annual rent statement, is still a little bit cumbersome. I appreciate the spirit of gathering the information, but I feel like it can be still optimized. But I don't want that to curtail the guidance moving forward. That's all. Thank you.
Understand. Thank you.
Ellen, this is Ben.
Go ahead, Ben.
So the rent statement only goes out once a year, and then there's a penalty statement in December and a final statement in June. But the main statement that everybody gets initially goes out in July now. We try to get it at the end of July. So there is time between now and July, I think, to edit through AMAC or SMAC or both these questions and make this a little more concise and fit a little better. But if this is what we want to do, so there is some time to work on this, because we won't be sending the whole everybody's lease statement until sometime in mid to late July. Just an FYI.
Great, thank you. That's a very helpful update on timing. And like I said before, I think that the first question is there a desire to try to for MRC to capture some of this information on the rent statement? From what I'm increasingly hearing, the answer is yes. It's just there's some details to be ironed out in terms of what does that look like. And I think that's very helpful advice or very helpful guidance to both staff and the ad hoc committee. Are there others on the phone that would like to speak? All right, hearing none, staff, if you could please mute the phone lines, because that's where we often get feedback. And I'm going to take it back to the ad hoc committee. So for members of this ad hoc committee, we have covered the two documents that we wanted to today. I think there's a good understanding around thoughts and opinions on the leasing document. And then it sounds like there might be further clarification needed for the rental document. How would you like to, are there other issues you want to address for today, or are there next steps you want to talk about?
I would just be interested in, before this goes before the commission, would it be possible for staff to provide a sort of an IT assessment of what they think they're going to be able to capture electronically and what the options will be for the future? I think that's helpful information for the commission to consider when this comes before them again in March. And for those of us looking at potential changes to this rent statement document, it will be helpful to know what those capabilities are as well. So I guess I'd just like an interim report on where that conversation is going.
I mean, so one clarification, I don't know if this specific, the rental statement document will come before the commission in March, but we can try to look at what our IT capacity or what the IT needs and try to provide some clarity to either the commission or to ad hoc committee members or members of SMAC or AMAC in terms of what this would look like. So we can touch base with IT.
My understanding from the conversation before was this document.
Jay, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
You're really faint.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, so my understanding was this document might not even need to go before the commission, that the only item that would have to go is the guidance document. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I think. Important caveat. I mean, with an issue of this significance, there are different, sort of more broadly, there are things that we bring in front of the commission for situational awareness. So these are activities we are working on that we think it's worth it for you to know. So we briefed the commission on the fishery disaster relief program this summer. There are guidelines that we bring in front of them, for approval to put into effect. There are oyster replenishment programs, et cetera. So we have a lot of, because it's not a guideline or a regulation, we do have some flexibility in terms of what we bring in front of the commission. But as we look at this and as we continue to speak with them on this, my guess is we will probably talk to them about some of the changes we may be making, less of a voting aspect and more of a this is the update on the program and an issue that you guys have shown you have a strong interest in. Other comments? Sorry, Jay, did you have additional questions on that?
No, only just to reiterate, Mike, that when you're giving them an update, I do think it will be helpful to have an understanding what the IT capabilities are going to be as well, since.
Okay. So, for members of the ad hoc committee, there has been a lot of conversation on, or there's been some questions in terms of how we want to proceed from here. I will open it up to you all first to talk about next steps before I provide thoughts or suggestions.
Ellen, this is Matt. I think based on our conversation today, it sounds like we've got a fairly clear roadmap here, which is to take the edited version of the guidelines, before before the commission. Hopefully, we can certainly have some additional discussion after this. It did look like what was thrown up on the screen maybe needed to be massaged a little bit and have a bullet point there. But generally, we have a framework for modified language that would go before the commission, and then we would continue conversations at the staff level and with AMAC and others on refining that the rent statement.
Got it. It looks like one of the people calling in trying to speak about this. I saw the name pop up. Okay. Associate Commissioner Ballard, did you have any additional thoughts or comments on that?
No, I think it's a clear plan going forward. Hopefully we can take up less time at the commission meeting in March than we did the last time we heard this, but seems like it'll be pretty smooth sailing to me.
Okay. So, sort of to echo the Secretary and the Associate Commissioner, the plan is to bring this back up in March, clarify, slightly massaging some of the language that was brought to you today on the guidelines with no major changes, and then continuing to work on the rent statement document while incorporating Jay Ford's suggestion of looking at IT needs. And Associate Commissioner Ballard, I echo your hope for March. I'll do a briefer presentation. Are there any final words from the ad hoc committee before I close this out? All right, I want to thank
I would just, Ellen, I'm sorry. This is Matt. I apologize for jumping in on you. I just wanted to thank you for your presentation and for leading us through this. And thanks to Associate Commissioner Ballard and the other members of the ad hoc committee and everybody who participated today. I think everybody's input is really valuable to this process, and the governor and I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you. Exactly what I was going to say. Thank you, everybody, for coming back together to work on this issue, for continuing to keep an open mind and work with staff as we try to solve these issues moving forward. And we will be talking about this at the March Commission meeting. As always, if you have any follow-up thoughts, questions, comments, please do not hesitate to reach out to the staff, myself, Ben, and we will get back to you. So thank you, everybody, for your time and for your patience. And I hope everybody has a fantastic afternoon. And we are done. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen.